Hi, good afternoon. My name's Ali Sample, and I'm your host for this afternoon's very special live lounge. And with me is my co-host, Emma.
Good afternoon. Hi.
And I'm going to do a formal introduction for our very special guest this afternoon. I'd like to thank you for joining us. This is a really special opportunity for anyone who loves literature and anyone who's in love with poetry, as I have been for most of my life, and anyone who's ever dreamt of spending a little bit of time with Ted Hughes or Wordsworth or Tennyson or Dryden. And this is an opportunity to sit down with the previous poet laureate, Dame Caroline Duffy, and ask her any questions that you've ever had about poetry, about what inspires her, about where her ideas have come from, or anything else that pops into your mind. So please, as we work through the next sort of 20-25 minutes with Caroline, please do drop your questions in the chat. And even if it's just to say hi and tell us where you're watching from, we would really love to hear from you. Dame Caroline Duffy was the very first female poet laureate, which is quite shocking when you think how long there have been poet laureates all the way back to Dryden. And she was poet laureate from 2009 through to 2019. So without any further ado, it behoves me to say a massive welcome, hello to Caroline.
Hello, it's lovely to be here, and I'm sorry I can't be in Lincoln, which I always love visiting, as you know, but I can see a bit of it behind you, Ali.
That's true. You can see the castle and cathedral, Caroline, where we would normally go to go and find
the beautiful cathedral. Yeah, it looks like a nice day there. It's nice here. I'm in South Manchester.
Well, where are you? Is that your kitchen?
Yeah, I'm at the kitchen table. I'm having a bit of a clear out in my study to get ready for Christmas, so it's full of boxes and books. So I'm at the kitchen table today.
Oh, so this is a very special insight into the kitchen of the world's most famous and brilliant poet and most inspiring woman who I've met. So what should we know about your kitchen, Caroline? What's your favorite ingredient and what do you like to cook?
Oh Lord, well, last night I made a kind of vegetarian spag bol.
Wow.
Which is what I tend to cook when I've run out of food, really. During the lockdown, I've been having a fortnightly delivery of fresh groceries, and then towards the end of that fortnight, it's down to what's in the cupboard, spaghetti or whatever.
Well, yes, I think we're all in that kind of boat, really, aren't we? I'm living off some quite strange things, to be honest. So we've got a couple of people who want to say hello to you straight away. Hisham is from Rotherham, and he's saying hello. And Sophie Watkins from Suffolk.
Hi, Sophie.
And Leanne's. So hi to all of them. And Emma, would you like to set out what we're going to be doing with Caroline today?
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody watching, if you're currently studying GCSE or A-level English literature, then undoubtedly you know Caroline, you know that you are likely to be studying her poems. So put in the chat any sort of poems that you're studying, because we are so fortunate to have Caroline back again with us for our live lounge on Wednesday afternoon. And we've already sort of reached out to a lot of schools, and they've given us some of the poems that they are studying currently. And that's what Caroline's going to sort of cover this afternoon. So I understand, Carol, you're going to kick off this afternoon with War Photographer. Is that right?
Yes, I got some requests from the schools to read different poems. So I've picked a handful that I'll read, and the first one is War Photographer, which is a very old poem of mine, written in the early 1980s. So it's so long ago it feels as if someone else wrote it, really. But just a bit of background, the poem is based on some conversations I had at that time with the war photographer, Don McCullen, whom I was lucky to know. And he was a vocational photographer. He felt that by going to war zones or areas of famine or conflict, that he could make a difference with sort of bearing witness. But he also felt a kind of ambivalence or guilt at actually making a living doing that. So he was a man of great conscience. And sometime after I'd known him, I wrote this poem. So in the poem, it moves from his dark room, which is in the English countryside, back to memories of photographs he took during war. And it ends with him going off again to another battleground. So it moves around a little bit in time and space. War photographer. In his dark room, he is finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows as though this were a church, and he a priest preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his hands, a half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane, he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care.
That's such a powerful poem, Carol Ann. What made you want to write it?
Well, as I said, meeting John McCullen made a huge impression on me. I was quite young when I met him on several occasions, and it's not often that you get to meet a war photographer who's been to such traumatic places and witnessed so much, but does want to make a difference and bear witness. So I suppose it's always stayed with me, my encounters with him and the conversations. And I think sometimes poems can be like splinters. Something goes in, and then sometime afterwards it will work its way out. Often poetry can be like that, and it will come to the surface. So the memory of him and the conversations with him eventually worked its way to the surface as a poem.
And there's a sense maybe of anger at the readers, but is that anger? And if it is anger, is it your anger or is it his anger?
One of the things that really disturbed him was the increased use of advertising in newspapers. So he found that his photographs, which when he first started working, I suppose in the early 60s, 70s, had been very respectfully presented, that there would now be next to a glossy advert for cars or luxury goods or supermodels. So he felt that he didn't want his work just being in a colour supplement next to adverts, and things had changed a little. So that was his anger. but obviously one that one could respect.
Very much. We've got a question actually from one of the people who's watching, Sarah Herbert, and she's studying English A level, and she'd like to know who inspired you most to begin writing poetry.
Hi, Sarah. I think, like most writers, I was inspired by my teachers. I was incredibly lucky at school with my English teachers in particular. And in fact, I've written some poems about my teachers. I have one poem called In Mrs. Tilsh's Class. She was my, what would you call it now? Year 6 teacher. And then when I went to secondary school, I had a fantastic English teacher called Miss Scriven. I actually read at her funeral a few years ago. So, yeah, with poetry particularly, it was my English teacher who made it alive and exciting and creative and something I wanted to imitate and have a go at. So I'd have to say my teachers first.
And I think that's a really important point. I mean, you're a visiting artist here at the University of Lincoln, and we're incredibly lucky to have you. And you do some amazing lectures, which are incredibly inspiring. And in a way, that's the difference between going to university and going to school. Going to school is sometimes very much learning by rote, and whereas hopefully at university, it's about becoming more creative. It's about finding creative solutions and problem solving, and that can be in literature as much as anything. At what point do you think you found your voice, Carol Ann?
Well, I'm still looking for it. And that's more serious an answer than it might seem. Poetry is never finished. It's a constant exploration and journey to perhaps excavate truth from silence. So every poem feels in a way like the first one that you've written. Obviously you learn as you rise and get older about things like craft and form, but the kind of secret heart of poetry is something that one is always looking for.
I kind of want to flag that quote to everyone who's listening, to excavate truth from silence. It's so strong. And we should say a big thank you actually to Tuxford Academy, who requested war photographer. So thank you to them. I'll take another question from Yolanda Joseph, if that's all right, before we go on to your next poem. And Yolanda's asking, who is your favourite poet, Carol Ann, and why?
Oh, hi, Yolanda. I hate this question because I have so many. So it can depend on the day. I suppose my favourite writer is Shakespeare. He to me almost is the language and is constantly relevant and surprising, and one can learn so much from him. And he's very inventive and playful, and just his mind seems to be a living, growing mind. With contemporary poets, I very much like Alice Oswald, who's the current professor of poetry at Oxford. So I'm always very interested in what she's doing. And my favourite recent book is by a poet called Glyn Maxwell. And his new book is called How the Hell Are You? And I thought that was a fantastic and very, very skillful collection. So I'll put those two in along with Shakespeare for today. The answer will be different tomorrow.
I think that's really, really a good answer. And it's probably a good moment to move on to one of my favourite poems, which was requested by William Farskell. And this is called Valentine.
Valentine. Not a red rose or a satin heart. I give you an onion It is a moon wrapped in brown paper. It promises light like the careful undressing of love. Here, it will blind you with tears like a lover. It will make your reflection a wobbling photo of grief. I'm trying to be truthful. Not a cute card or a kissogram. I give you an onion. Its fierce kiss will stay on your lips, possessive and faithful as we are, for as long as we are. Take it. Its platinum loops shrink to a wedding ring, if you like. Lethal. Its scent will cling to your fingers, cling to your knife. So that was written for Valentine's Day, not for anyone. So a kind of imaginary exercise, not a literal one. I didn't give anyone an onion. But I was trying to think of something that wasn't cliched to give as a Valentine. And in fact, just here where I'm sitting is a whole tray of onions. So I think I perhaps might have written that poem in the kitchen and seen an onion and began to think of it as an image for love, something very lovely, but also something that can sometimes make us cry. So it's a very simple metaphor for romantic love.
I always think, but maybe I'm misunderstanding it. I always think the poem is also a little bit rude, but
rude.
Yes, I'm terrified of being rude myself now.
Tell me more.
Well, just the way the scent sticks to your fingers, and it's kind of like the scent of the person you love. That's how I'd always sort of understood it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, well, we like the way our lovers smell, don't we?
Yeah,
I think
the smell reminds you of even if it's a family member, doesn't it? And not even your Valentine. So I suppose that's probably
yeah.
I hadn't thought of it like that, Ellie. And
sorry,
could be rude.
That's the creative mind. Curious.
The thing is, I've forgotten. I mean, if you write a poem sort of 20, 30 years ago, as I was saying earlier, the further away in time you get from the poem, the less the poem belongs to you. It belongs on the page or in the world. So I often say to students when they're writing about a poem, if they have to in an exam, that it's their poem, so they must bring their experience, their imagination, their analysis to the poem. Their replies are just as good as mine.
And I think that's really important, isn't it? Because there's always that fear that your interpretation of a poem, I felt it then, that your interpretation of a poem isn't necessarily valid or real.
Well, looking at it now, I can see that image is erotic. And it could be this at the time I meant it, but I can't remember. So what you say is just as important as anything I say.
Oh, bless you. We must say a big hello to Sophie Watkins, actually, because Sophie has requested Meantime, which I think you said you might read later on.
Yeah, and it's also now, if you like.
Oh, yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah. Sophie. And Sophie, it'd be interesting to know which school or college you're at in Suffolk so that we can sort of promote to your fellow A-level students on Wednesday that Carol-Anne will be here if none of your friends are watching.
Okay, Sophie, I'll read this for you. Meantime, this is the title poem of the collection Meantime. And this is a love poem written at the end of a relationship, and it's written at the time, I think, which we had only a couple of weeks ago, when the clocks go back in the autumn, which is my most hated part of the year. I really hate it when the clocks go back. I think the clocks should go forward 2 hours in the autumn so that we have more light, not less light. meantime. The clock slid back an hour and stole light from my life as I walked through the wrong part of town, mourning our love. And of course, unmendable rain fell to the bleak streets, where I felt my heart gnaw at all our mistakes. If the darkening sky could lift more than 1 hour from this day, there are words I would never have said, nor have heard you say. But we will be dead, as we know, beyond all light. These are the shortened days and the endless nights.
Thank you, Caroline. It seems right to point out that obviously today we're in the heart of Diwali, the festival of lights, where we celebrate the victory of light over darkness. And do you think light is an important theme for you?
Very much so. I've actually written a poem called The Grammar of Light, which is looking at light almost as a language. So yeah, and it very much affects, as I'm sure it does many people, it affects my mood and how I feel about the day and what I'm going to do. I really don't like when it gets dark too early and everything seems very closed in. In fact, during lockdown, I've been here in South Manchester since March, been nowhere. Normally I would have been travelling not only all over this country, but to places like Italy and France and other places. So I've been at home all year, and the best part of the lockdown for me was up till very recently when I could be in the garden. So I would spend all day, particularly in the summer till it got dark. I would take my work outside and stay out till I got kind of driven in, really. And that was very healing for me, to be out in the light and in the air. Whereas now it's, you know, you've got to go in at 4 o'clock or you're in all day sort of thing.
Yes, it's very noticeable somehow, isn't it? During lockdown, that suddenly it's pitch black at 4:30 and you can't go for a walk, and it's very difficult, I think, for everyone when there's nowhere to go and the only thing you're allowed to do is go outside for a walk, and actually it's pitch black and quite scary.
Yeah, it reminds me of coming home from school as a child in the dark.
It is
Yes.
so powerful, isn't it, light? I think everything intensifies during this period, and absolutely the light of day and night is so powerful now.
That's really true. Now we've got some really big questions for you, if that's all right.
Oh yeah.
Emma, do you want to take us through these, starting from Sophie's?
Sophie, hi Sophie. So thank you for requesting that, and a big shout out to Thetford Academy in Norfolk. So thank you for that. We have one that is about from Olivia in Hertfordshire, and she's currently studying meantime for her A-level English literature. And she just wanted to say thank you because it is one of her favourite poems. So that is really nice to sort of hear.
Well, thank you, Olivia. Good luck with the A-level.
And Sophie actually asked, who requested meantime, she said, how has writing poetry changed or defined your life?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, it kind of has been my life, really, because I've written poetry, Sophie, since I was 11. And I'm now 64. So that's a very long time. And I haven't ever not been involved with, or even of just reading it. concerned with poetry. So for me, it's like my invisible friend. It's a constant companion. Even when I'm not writing, a part of me is processing the world through poetry. So I can go, say, 2 months without writing a poem, but the poem is building itself up so that it will come at some point. So yes, it pretty much is my life, has given me my life.
And there's a question about betrothal. And obviously this person who's called Q, I'm afraid, so from James Bond, they're asking, could betrothal be inspired by Shakespeare's character Ophelia? It's one of my favorites. Oh, she says her name is Megan. Sorry, Megan.
From Huddersfield.
Hi, Megan. That's a poem from Rapture, which is a book of 52 love poems charting the course of a love affair from its beginning through all its events to its ending. And yes, the character of Ophelia is faintly in the background of that poem, in the way that, you know, if you put garlic in something, the taste will be somewhere in the background. And in that particular collection, Shakespeare is very much an influence. I mentioned earlier that he's kind of my presiding spirit as a poet. And fairy tale is also in Rapture. So that's well spotted with that poem, Betrothal.
Yeah, no, that's very well spotted. And another question from Jack Dyson, who's a really big fan and wanted to ask, do you think the representation of femininity has changed in recent years in the way that some are inclusive just to pacify the oversensitive and maybe disingenuously? That's a big question, Jack.
That's very.
That's a hard question. Well, I wrote a collection called Feminine Gospels, which is poems about exploring different ways of being. So there's a poem in it called Loud, about getting louder. There's a poem called Long Queen, which is looking at different ways of being a woman in history. There's a poem called Tall, which imagines just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's lots of transformations around the idea of being myself, really. I obviously I'm not going to speak for all aspects of gender, but that's a very autobiographical book about my attitude to me.
And Jack's come back to you and says that they loved the feminine gospels and it inspired their question. So thank you. And maybe that's a good link to Before You Were Mine, which was requested by William Farskell.
I'll read that. That's probably be the last one I can do, but I'm doing more on Wednesday, aren't I?
Definitely.
Before You Were Mine is sort of a love poem to my mum. And in the poem, I'm trying to imagine her before she was a mum, before she was married, before she had children, before she had me. And I'm using photographs and stories that she told me about growing up, about going ballroom dancing, all kinds of things to try and see her before I was born. Before You Were Mine. I'm 10 years away from the corner you laugh on with your pals, Maggie McGeaney and Jean Duff. The three of you bend from the waist, holding each other or your knees and shriek at the pavement. Your polka dot dress blows round your legs, Marilyn. I'm not here yet. The thought of me doesn't occur in the ballroom with 1,000 eyes, the fizzy movie tomorrows the right walk home could bring. I knew you would dance like that. Before you were mine, your ma stands at the close with a hiding for the late one. You reckon it's worth it. The decade ahead of my loud, possessive yell was the best one, eh? I remember my hands in those high-heeled red shoes, relics. And now your ghost clatters towards me over George Square, till I see you, clear as scent, under the tree with its lights, and whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart? Cha-cha-cha. You teach me the steps on the way home from Mass, stamping stars from the wrong pavement. Even then, I wanted the bold girl winking in Portobello, somewhere in Scotland, before I was born. That glamorous love lasts, where you sparkle and waltz and laugh before you were mine.
That's so powerful, isn't it? And what inspired you to write that poem, Carol Ann?
My mum used to love telling me stories about when she was a teenager, and her favourite thing was ballroom dancing, which is now back in fashion with Strictly. But when I was a child, it wasn't. So it seemed very old-fashioned and something that people didn't do, really. And I always wanted to have been her friend going to the ballroom dances rather than her child hearing about it. So that's what made me begin that poem.
That's really interesting. And I suspect a lot of the sort of viewers today would be in that situation as a child. I think that's a real sort of strong feeling that as a child, you don't want to be the child, you want to be the friend, don't you? If you have such. So.
Yeah, you want to do the stuff, not hear about it.
Absolutely. Have we got any other questions, Ellie?
I think there was a message from Swasti who stayed with us all morning, actually. So hi, Swasti, from me. But Swasti says to you, Caroline, that she managed to get a grade 9 in English literature thanks to you. She wants to do medicine, but she really couldn't miss this chance to meet you. Sorry. So she's missed her talk on medicine to come here and see you, Caroline.
Oh, hi, Swasti. Well, congratulations. I'm sure it was all your own work. And if I ever need some advice on anything medical, I'll try and get hold of you, and you can tell me what to do.
Definitely, and I think this is a curative for the soul, and much needed in this current time. And I know we're talking words, but the word unprecedented. Can I ask one question before we wrap up, Caroline? How do you feel about the word unprecedented now? Are you bored of hearing it?
Oh, you mean it's overuse?
Just in recent times with the COVID pandemic, it's as someone who loves words and language as much as you, I wondered if you'd got a view on it.
Well, the word I use is clusterfuck. So I prefer that, really.
Oh, I hope Darren's beat that. No, it does sum it up though, and it's I think that sums it up. So, as we mentioned, we're having Caroline back on Wednesday. We do a regular live lounge on a Wednesday evening at around about 4:30. Dame Caroline Duffy has very kindly agreed to join us this coming Wednesday, and we're going to be looking at The World's Wife, if you're still happy to do that, Caroline.
Absolutely.
Which has got some of my massive favourites in, so I will be very excited. But just a huge thank you from me. I feel so inspired, and the idea of excavating truth from silence, I think, is going to resonate with me for the rest of the day, at least, and I will bore Emma with that later. Emma,
never get bored. Never get bored. Just to say a massive thank you, as on behalf of the University of Lincoln, and you are so inspiring. And I think it's very clear that this afternoon that you are inspiring much more than myself and Ellie. And so we are absolutely delighted to have you back on Wednesday to have a little bit more.
Well, it's a pleasure. Lots of love to everyone, and stay safe.
We'll see you soon, I hope, Carol Ann.